Hi, I'm Mark Unkefer, and welcome to Direct Line, Montgomery County Republican Club. And we're privileged to have tonight two great guests, the Chesapeake governors, Governor George Allen and Governor Bob Ehrlich. And I'm on with Dwight Patel. And this is a great opportunity to have two guys. You guys never served in Congress at the same time, because it was a little overlap when you were first elected to the Senate, and Bob Ehrlich was running for Congress, running for governor was your last session in time. But people in the Senate and the House don't get together all that much, do they?
Well, if I were a senator and Bob Ehrlich were a member of Congress, we'd team up on a lot of good ideas.
That's
You,
for sure.
you want, and Bob knows that as governor. You got to get both the House and the Senate to agree. And Bob and I have very similar philosophies of government, of trusting free people and free enterprise.
Well, that's for sure. And on a very personal level, we have always gotten along very well, been friends. Besides the philosophical underpinnings that we both share a love for football and athletics, and I'm just really pleased to be with my good friend.
Well, and Bob has some great prospects coming up, and they'll be graduating and be able to turn pro when they're playing sports again. By the way, for all your listeners, the great thing about sports, and this is what we should aspire to in our society, is sports is a meritocracy. The teams I played on, the teams my father coached, there were players of all different races, religions, ethnicities. They're from Tennessee, they're from Texas, they're from Pennsylvania, they're from all over. And none of that mattered. All you cared about is, could they help the team win? Can they punt or pass or catch or whatever? And they're on a level playing field. And that's what we aspire to, I believe, as common sense conservatives, with that aspirational aspect of our country being a meritocracy where everyone, no matter their race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, have an equal opportunity on a level playing field to compete and succeed to the best of their abilities. And the role of the government is to make sure that our team, Team America, is competitive. Whereas governors, you're trying to make your state more competitive for investments and jobs for the people in that state. And that means good education, safe communities, and competitively lower taxes, as well as a skilled, capable workforce from which to draw. And the states that do that win. The states that have high taxes and high costs of doing business are generally losing population. And ones that are not, like Texas and Tennessee and Florida and Nevada and North Carolina, those are states that are prospering and growing. And that's why I think Governor Hogan got elected in Maryland. He's adopting many of the policies you put through, Bob, when you were governor, and he's getting them through because people in Maryland saw their neighbors were leaving to going to states that were less taxed.
It's interesting. First, there's a couple of points here. One, getting back to Governor Allen's original point, football particularly has been such a shared love of ours, such a big part of our lives. Everybody knows Governor Allen's story, his family, his dad, his story, and Marylanders know my story, taken off the sandlots at an early age and given the opportunity to go to a really elite school because I could play ball. And then using football in college and having a good career in college. And we love the game. We love the game for particular reasons, though. And Governor Allen hit it right on the head. When you walk in that stadium, it doesn't matter what you look like. You're a fan. And it cuts across all lines. It cuts across all. It's one of the reasons we love athletics so much. It cuts across every line that we have to divide ourselves in our culture. And if you're a fan of a team, you're a fan. And nobody asks about your religious orientation, your political orientation, what you look like, how tall you are, whatever. And so, again, I think that's the reason that athletics play such a central part in American culture. With regard to the escapees, George, you will appreciate this. In my campaigns, I always cited southern Pennsylvania, Shrewsbury, and as I refer to it, Maryland, because Shrewsbury South is simply Maryland escapees. And I thought the most tangible indictment of Maryland tax policy was traffic from Shrewsbury South in the morning and north in the evening, because these were Marylanders who had escaped into Pennsylvania because of taxes. They worked in Maryland, they identified with Maryland teams, they were, in many cases, multi-generation Marylanders, but because of either regulatory policy or tax policy, they decided to escape to southern Pennsylvania. And it's made our party, quite frankly, weaker in Maryland, because a lot of folks who do that share our political philosophy.
Yeah, they're economically literate.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they see that up in New Hampshire, you know, all the people, because I love their license plates, live free or die. But they have no sales tax, no income tax, and all these folks from Massachusetts go there to shop. And we see it somewhat in Southwest Virginia, where we border Tennessee. Tennessee has no state income tax. And you just go right across the state line, and you see so much prosperity on the Tennessee side. And that is, you know, Tennessee's always ranked as, you know, one of the top 5 states for business. It's booming. Alliance Bernstein, $100 billion business out of New York City, moved their headquarters from New York City to Nashville, Tennessee, where they pay 0 income taxes. And so, you know, the states like Texas and Florida and Tennessee, Georgia, states with lower taxes or no state income taxes are booming. And out west, Arizona and Nevada, with people escaping California with their 13.3% income tax. And with the new tax laws where you only can deduct $10,000 of state and local taxes, I think this exodus is going to continue and accelerate. My favorite is Ocasio-Cortez's mother, AOC. She moved to Florida. So, too bad her daughter.
For the weather. It was for the weather.
Yeah, but it's also 0 state income taxes.
Yeah.
I wish her daughter was as economically literate.
There's a reason players want to play for the Dolphins, I guess, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, Tom Brady. When Tom Brady had a choice of going with the Chargers in California or Tampa, the Buccaneers, it's either 0 state income tax or 13.3.
Yeah.
Tiger Woods is brilliant compared to Mickelson. He pays 0 as a Florida resident. Mickelson gets hit with 13.3% income taxes.
It won't surprise you at all to learn, and Mark and Dwight know this for a fact, probably a third of my finance committee when I was in legislature, Congress, as governor, were not citizens of Maryland. They were 5-month and 29-day visitors in Maryland, and they were 6-month and a day living in Florida. And we've seen that really accelerate over the years. And again, it's a fact. And for the folks listening, everybody knows this is not simply a function of 2 opinions from former governors. Every economist who's looked at this, the numbers are startling. The number of escapees, expatriates who've left from high tax states and gone to low tax states.
Yeah. It's interesting though that sometimes those migrants take with them their desire for services and begin to change the character of the communities they're going to. They, how shall I say, they come dangerously close sometimes to killing off the golden goose.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they forget why they moved in the first place.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, you guys know my home away from home is Central Florida, the Space Coast. And, you know, right now, all the levers of power in Brevard County are controlled by Republicans. There is not a single Democrat elected in Brevard County. And then we have, as a result, we got a lot of transplants. A lot of Marylanders are moving down to the Melbourne area. And I keep telling them when they go down there, remember, 1, you're not allowed to vote the way you vote in Maryland down there. 2, you're really not allowed to vote for at least 10 years till you get acclimated to what it's like to live in a free state, you know. But
yeah, you know, I have a lot of friends in Texas, and you know, Texas has just been booming, and their worry is all these people come down, and as Governor Ehrlich said, and Mark, they bring their politics with them. This is a great book here. It's called Rich States, Poor States, and this is Art Laffer and Stephen Moore put this together. It's American Council of Legislative Conservative Legislators. And it really is a migration of people from one state to another. And the state that's losing the most population of any is New York,
Right.
by far losing the most. And New Jersey, Illinois, I mean, these are Connecticut, they're all losing population because people are going to where there's more opportunities. And you would think that it'd be like folks coming from the former Soviet bloc of Central Europe. They're the most patriotic people in America, or folks that were in Poland or Czechoslovakia or Hungary or Bulgaria. They appreciate freedom. And they're the best voices for saying, hey, stop going that way. We've left that sort of centralized command and control. We like freedom and opportunity here in America.
It's
You
funny,
know, we're-
those voices are never heard during the immigration debates on the network news. You never hear those voices.
We're seeing a lot about the sort of advantages of federalism as we can observe how different states are responding to COVID-19. And I know, Governor Allen, you're on the commission that Heritage has set up on dealing with the crisis. What do we learn from how different states are responding to it?
Well, it's the beauty of our country. There's all sorts of checks and balances, and government closest to the people understands the needs. In fact, being on with all of y'all back in April, when you told me Montgomery County, Maryland was giving data based on zip code, not just countywide, I went to this commission. We just issued our report on Monday, and one of the recommendations actually came from being on the show with all of y'all there, and said, hey, counties are pretty big, and there's differences obviously in a state where Southwest Virginia or maybe Western Maryland had nothing near what you all had in the DC area or Baltimore area, or the Eastern Shore maybe had less. And so you want to open up counties based on the data, and that's one of our recommendations. The states that are doing the best are those, and everyone had a different situation, but one of the things, and Governor Ehrlich and I both were governors, one of the recommendations we've made for state legislators is to review the executive power, the emergency powers that are granted to governors in light of some of the decrees that seem excessive in some states in the midst of this pandemic. In Virginia, our governor's been very halting. And there's some parts of the state, Northern Virginia, those commissars wanted to stay closed even longer than the state was. But Virginia was really a month behind Tennessee. And there were businesses in Bristol, which State Street divides Bristol, Tennessee, and Virginia. And I have friends who have businesses on the Virginia side who literally looked across the street to shops and stores and restaurants that were open while they still had to be shut down. And so Virginia was very slow, but in the midst of some of this in Virginia, for example, they finally opened up the beaches, but the governor said you can't have amplified music on the beach. Well, I don't think radios transmit viruses, and it's just mindless. So I think that some of these emergency powers that have gotten officious nannies to be even more burdensome and restrictive need to be reviewed and revised. So there's still that, the checks and balances that maybe it should be for a period of 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but have some sort of check or balance in it. And the other thing, and this I think could help Maryland and Virginia, and this is one of my favorite recommendations looking at future pandemics that will undoubtedly hit our country, is we should never again be so dangerously vulnerable to medicines, pharmaceutical agents, and health equipment coming from supply chains from countries such as China in particular that are clearly adverse and unreliable for our country. I've always talked about national energy independence for America, which we have, but we need to make sure for our national health security that in the future, more of these medicines and pharmaceuticals and also medical equipment are made here in the United States of America. And I think Virginia and Maryland are both states that are really well positioned with our universities, with our talent, and some of our biotech type companies to be able to take the lead in making more of these vital, essential medicines pharmaceuticals here in the United States of America rather than being subject to whatever the People's Republic of China regime they want to do. Heck, you wouldn't feed your dog food from China. I wouldn't want to ingest even an aspirin that has an ingredient from China.
And the sad thing is, governors, back when we had all the lead painted toys, if you remember, I think it was in 2007, 2008, 2009, in one of those years, there was all these Chinese made toys that were being sold in America that had lead based paint, which children were getting lead poisoning. You think that would have been the alarm bell that would have said, hey, let's not buy medicine from China. I mean, look what they're doing to the toys. What do you think they're putting in the medicines we're buying from China? You think that would have been a red flag right there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Right. What's interesting here is it took a Donald Trump to get a Chamber of Commerce party, and guilty. We're pro-business. We're pro-business governors. We revel in that. We believe in it. But it took a Donald Trump, a really outsider, an anti-establishment type, to get at least one establishment in Washington to question this over-reliance, as treating China as a third world economy for the last 30 years and what it's done to us. And it was, Governor Allen, that was not popular. That was not a popular stance to take in Republican primaries. A lot of the Republican GOP establishment in Washington was taken aback by it. To this day, does not like the president, resented the president, but the president was right. He was absolutely right in that regard. If I can just get back, first of all, I love the two takeaways. One private sector takeaway, supply lines. One public sector takeaway, the ability, the power, unlimited power of some governors. So I look forward to your report. I've used sort of this, the difference in approach between the red and blue states to further, I guess, educate some audiences and people for that matter on the differences between the parties. I've used the word instinct a lot. It was the instinct of red state governors, for the most part, a couple exceptions, but for the most part, the instinct of red state governors to get the real science. Don't buy into necessarily narratives from this group or that group with an agenda, but just get the real science and open up as quickly as possible to give people their freedom again, to get the private economy going again, where on the other hand, again, showing sort of the philosophical predisposition of a lot of folks on the left, the instinct was shut down, keep the shutdown, authoritarianism, run amok in some cases. And it's really a very clear difference between the parties. And I think we can use that example going forward in an election year.
I think that's a really good point. And in fact, none of this should be partisan, but you are right for the most part. And because there are exceptions in this National Coronavirus Recovery Commission that Heritage put together, we have diverse 17 members commissions. J.C. Watts is one of our commissioners.
Great guy.
From Oklahoma. There's the best quarterback.
That's my classmate.
Yeah, he's a great guy. But what we believe is you can save lives and livelihoods. There needs to be proportionality and balance in it. And the states that opened up quicker, like Texas and Tennessee and Georgia and Florida, those are and South Carolina, those are generally really good pro-business states. An exception for the Democrats is the governor of Colorado, who's done an outstanding job. Yes. He analyzed it as Denver's different than Colorado Springs, which is different than Grand Junction. And, just like New York City is different than Sioux City and Oklahoma City. And each place has their and even Como did recognize that upstate New York is different than New York City. And so it's, I think there'll be after action review of this, but these governors who are excessively shutting down and locking down and caging free people and free enterprise, they're going to be the first ones complaining that they don't have enough tax revenue. Well, if businesses aren't opening, you're not getting sales tax revenues. And if people aren't working, they're not paying income taxes. And so this is going to end up harming, essential government services, particularly schools, which is a big, education's the biggest funding item in most states' budgets. And so they're only digging a hole deeper every day, every week. they stay unnecessarily shut down. And some businesses clearly are not going to come back.
Yeah, it's some businesses, some schools, potentially some colleges.
Yeah.
Think about all those in your state, in Pennsylvania, my state, but particularly in Virginia, Pennsylvania. There's an awful lot of private colleges out there with high tuitions. They're liberal arts schools. They don't have a lot of money in the pot. They're hurting. And Governor Allen, I think some may not make it.
They may not. And a lot of students aren't going to pay high tuition to take classes online.
Correct. That's correct.
With it. And the other arrogance of all this was that some governors would call businesses, some are essential and some are non-essential. To me, that's just the height of arrogance. It's certainly an essential business to whoever the owners are who've invested in it and the millions of people who work for it. Then they shut down so many hospitals. I mean, in Virginia, it was clear that hospitals were not going to get overrun and inundated. And there's thousands of furloughed hospital workers and people not getting cancer screenings or treatment or diabetes treatment because of this shutdown. And it just, most of these forecasts and this modeling was obviously way off and exaggerated.
It's an interesting challenge to see the difference, the competing values that folks place. So we see this whole conversation of churches not being able to reopen in many areas, but on the other hand, demonstrations went forward. So we had essentially two different expressions of First Amendment being treated very, very differently.
But again, that you see that reflected in the blue and the red states for the most part. I mean, it's tough to get away from politics. And I don't mean politics in a negative sense. It's tough to get away from philosophical differences. We all have a review of the First Amendment, for example, and how essential church services are, how essential school is. So at least the socialization part of school. Governor Allen was talking about discretionary medical procedures, with regard to certainly outlawing them for the time being, what that's done to so many physician practices and so many hospitals, so many medical clinics. We haven't talked about the increased suicide rates. The social ills associated with prolonged lockdowns is not a part of the narrative the press wants to push. We've seen that. And so you see it on Fox, you may see it on some conservative outlets, but again, this is art, not science, and it's line drawing. Governors are engaged in line drawing exercises here. I love Governor Allen's last point here with regard to essential, non-essential. If you're working and you have a mortgage, you're depending on that job to pay your mortgage. That's an essential job.
Absolutely. And the sad thing is they think, well, who is going to pay the rent? Whoever owns it has to pay a mortgage. They have maintenance and so forth, and all those workers and those families that are dependent on it as well. And it's an unfortunate situation. But you're right, Bob, Governor Ehrlich, in that the media has just hyped this, and any state that looks to open up, they're just saying, well, you don't care about lives. We do care about lives. And we've learned a lot in these last 2 or 3 months. And what we've found in Virginia, maybe similar in Maryland, is that, gosh, it's like 80% of the deaths are people over age 65, and nearly 60%, maybe 57, 58 of deaths are in nursing homes.
Yes.
And so we need to protect. We know who are the most vulnerable. There are people who are elderly and have underlying conditions, respiratory or otherwise. And African Americans and Latinos have had a disproportionate fatality rate. And some of that is because of their underlying health. Some is access to health that needs to get equal access to health. And some is their jobs are more dangerous jobs with it. But we need to protect those who are most vulnerable, but not cage everyone. So we need to be smarter and more balanced in the way we move forward.
And we already see the narrative, the second coming, the next wave here, and that narrative. And with regard to the science that Governor Allen just talked about, nobody is asking the question, at least so far, okay, if there is a second wave and we've done what we need to do with regard to the vulnerable population. What exactly does that mean?
Right.
More likely than not, on the basis of what we know now, people are going to get it, and many of the young and healthy won't even know they have it.
Right.
And so, what does that mean? Again, we're line drawing here. And so there may be a second wave, but that's not the end of it's a semicolon. It's not a period. What does that mean?
Well, let's look ahead to the.
Well, it means what you have to do. And this is our phase 5 in our recovery commission, is that you need to be prepared. We need to stockpile protective equipment for frontline workers and everyone else, and make sure that we're not having to get it in from some other place, and who knows if it meets the quality standards. It means that we need to stockpile therapeutics as they come forward. When a vaccine is eventually and possibly discovered, we need to make sure that we are ready for it next time. And the solution should not be a lockdown in this devastation of people's lives and their livelihoods.
Because we generally know who the most vulnerable population is.
Right.
It's common sense. You take the population first.
So looking ahead to the fall, obviously we're in a presidential year and we're talking about some very dramatically different perspectives. How will this frame the election, and what does it say about Joe Biden and that the way he's approaching it?
Well, I hope the national discourse runs along the lines of what we're discussing right now. Quite frankly, let's talk common sense. Let's not talk media-driven narratives. Let's not talk about demographers that were really off base. Let's talk about the facts as we know them, what we think is going to happen, who the vulnerable population is, who the vulnerable population is not, what has to happen with regard to the economy. This is a great conversation to have. The two major party candidates need to have that conversation. Now, whether Joe Biden wants to engage, whether Joe Biden can actually engage in that conversation is another matter. And I think Republicans, George, I've been admonishing Republicans to be careful, because you and I have known that gentleman for many years, Senator Biden. You served with him. I served with him. I was in the Senate, but he was obviously there when I was in Congress. Sort of, Joe Amtrak, sort of mainstream liberal, nice guy, very popular at home. And the person we see so far in that basement is not that guy we know. On two accounts. One, obviously, he's having real difficulty maintaining the ability to engage in a prolonged sort of discussion. But more importantly, or as importantly, in my view, I see the same thing happening with the Biden campaign as I saw with the Hillary Clinton campaign. Hillary Clinton was always a mainstream liberal. Joe Biden was a mainstream liberal, but the Democratic Party today is making their candidates run as progressives. Joe Biden running against natural gas in Western Pennsylvania. All right. And to the extent, listen, God bless them. To the extent they want to do this, fine, because I don't think they're going to win the race. But at some point, and with regard to speech and other issues, I got to ask, where are the liberals? Where are the liberals when it comes to free speech on campus in this society right now? Where are the liberals? They're being shut down by the progressives. And I think my prediction is, at least at this point, to the extent they're going to do this, they're going to turn their party further and further left, they're going to leave a lot of moderate, even left-leaning Democrats, blue-collar Democrats, ripe for the picking again for the president.
Exactly. I mean, the other day we were talking about this on our other show about how, where are the Pat Moynahans? Where are the Scoop Jacksons? Where are the Joe Liebermans? Where are the sometimes Sam Nunns, who were moderate? They weren't nutty as these guys are. I mean,
but hey, Dwight, just tell me, you're right. First of all, you're absolutely right. I agree with you. But Governor Allen, we hear your perspective on this. We talk about the 60s a lot. We're of that age. We remember. And it was all about speech, and Berkeley was speech central, and it was dissent and the great protest moments and MLK and the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the women's movement. It was all about speech, and the left owned that issue. And today the progressives are shutting them down left and right.
Yeah, and the concept of freedom of expression is just one of the key pillars of a free and just society. I'm Reagan Ranch Presidential Scholar for the Young Americas Foundation. They have college campuses, Young Americans for Freedom, and some work with the college Republicans and so forth. And the most intolerant places for anybody who doesn't agree with them are college campuses. Yep. And they shout them down and all the rest. And it's, the other thing is I refuse to call them progressives, and because they're regressive.
Yes.
You're talking about them not wanting the Marcellus Shale, the natural gas out of Pennsylvania. Well, who's going to be paying the higher fuel costs, higher electricity costs? Everyone will, but the people hurt the worst by higher food or fuel or electricity costs are lower and lower middle income families. And so to me, it's regressive. It's not Al Gore flying in a private jet to a UN climate conference in Cancun or Paris or somewhere like that. They can afford it, but it is just so harmful to working families, what they're doing. And so
I love that. I'm going to steal that from you. I love that.
What, calling them regressives? Fine.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, it is. It's regressive. The people hurt the worst are lower and middle income working families. It's not the wealthy elites in Manhattan or Hollywood or Malibu or inside the Beltway.
And it's certainly not liberal. And again, going back to the original question, Dwight, the liberal Joe Biden that served with us would not have had this view. I don't think he has this view now, quite frankly. But
here's what's happening. Bob's exactly right. His office was right across the hall from me, and he's from Delaware. And Delaware understands economics, and it has no sales tax, and a lot of businesses have moved to Delaware because of their pro-business approaches. And he was a moderate. About the only moderate really in the Senate these days is Joe Manchin out of West Virginia. And that's a state that is nominally Democrat, but their party is coal. And I mean, these energy resources are what propels and funds their communities and all the stores, even if they're not involved in oil or gas or coal. That's what funds their schools and the services and the barber shops and all the different merchants that there are in those communities. And I think that what's happened, and some of it's because of redistricting, is that in the House, and it's especially House districts, that people are worried more about winning their primary. After Eric Cantor got knocked out in Virginia, and then AOC knocked out, I've forgotten the guy's name, but he's fairly high up. Yeah. And then now they're worried about their hides in a primary. And so one of the reforms, I think, you may disagree with me, but in Virginia, I've supported a nonpartisan or bipartisan redistricting reform. So you have districts that are compact and contiguous with communities of similar interest together, rather than politicians picking the voters, let the voters choose their representatives. And you've seen in Maryland some of the most egregious redistricting maps.
Governor, we have never talked about this, you and I, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. The problem in the House is too many safe seats.
Yeah,
you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, and so they have no reason to worry about what's good for everyone and saying, look, if I can get 60% of what I want or 70%, it's better than nothing. And it's gotten too absolutist.
Absolutely. And as you said, the only problem you may have is somebody more extreme in the primary.
Oh, exactly. In Virginia, they just knocked out Denver Riggleman in a convention, which is very limited, the number of people. It was like a drive-in convention, and they knocked out Denver Riggleman from a safe seat, and they've nominated somebody who's fairly theocratic, and now it's going to be a toss-up race. And so if you actually care about governing and getting your ideas accomplished, as opposed to making it a very narrow, extreme party, and Maryland, your governor there, you're a prime example, Bob, in you winning in Maryland. You didn't win with just Republicans. You had to get a lot of Democrats. But same with Governor Hogan.
We could kind of borrow some from you. Yeah, we don't have any. Very few, but you're right. but again, in Virginia, at least the way it used to be, and the way Maryland used to be, and still is to some extent, but there are a lot of conservative Democrats, and they feel they don't have a home. So to the extent we can appeal to that group, we should appeal to that group.
Right, exactly. And each party's getting pulled, though, unfortunately, to the extremes. And that makes it difficult in governance. And anyway, Joe Biden and their party has been taken over in many respects as far as their policies by these socialistic ideas, the AOCs of the world. And, you know, they don't want to be using any natural gas. They're against any sort of affordable, reliable senses of energy. They're for all this class warfare, higher taxes. Huh?
They're against borders.
Oh, yeah, they're against borders. They don't want police. I mean, it's just amazing how extreme they have gotten. And Joe Biden, I agree with you, Bob, completely. He was a mainstream work with the other side, liberal Democrat.
Yeah.
And now he's taking positions that are from the far extreme left and these socialistic ideas that would be so harmful to the people of our country and our country's competitiveness. We now, and obviously when you get to the election, I hope people are looking at who's going to be best, whose policies, whose ideas do we trust most to revive our economy. The economy was going fantastic in February. It was great for everyone. Lowest unemployment rates ever for African Americans, for Latinos, for Asians, for women. And now we have this government decreed recession by the federal government to save lives. And then obviously the governors are making their decisions, and each state's going to come back differently. But we need to get our country going again, and whose ideas are better. And I think President Trump, and people won't like his manner or his personality, and people in New York City are not known for their hospitality. They're pushy, they're brusque, and and all of that. That's the way they are. But what I care about is his actions, and his actions on lower taxes. Regulatory reform is fantastic for this country. That's what's going to help us get more pharmaceutical manufacturing back in this country. It's less regulations and less taxes. I think that his stands on strengthening our national defense are fantastic as well. People will care about the judges he's nominated in various issues. So compared to someone who says, we need higher taxes and we need more regulations, we need higher fuel costs and higher food costs, and we're gonna be apologetic for our country around the world. I just would hope people in these battleground states will say, well, I may not particularly like the way he does things, but for our future, our security, and our prosperity, he's got the better ideas.
Well, I would adopt everything I just heard for the last couple minutes there, and I'd just add Iran and China.
Oh, yeah.
I want somebody strong. I want somebody who understands. The Democrats use that Russia narrative. Last time I checked, Russia had the GDP of the state of Texas. Right? Russia, in comparative terms, is not a threat. We now understand, I think, partly through circumstances, partly through coronavirus, partly through the fact that President Trump has been hard stand on this for many, many years, that we need to deal with China, and not from a position of weakness. And I think he gets that, and I think Senator Biden does not.
And yeah, and the other point, I think one things I think people will be looking at is look at the jobs numbers for last month. I mean, everyone would say, oh, unemployment's going to be over 20%, and look at the numbers. I mean, everyone understands that who's better to bring the economy back, Joe Biden or President Trump? And that's the question they ask.
Well, Dwight, if that is the question, every election boils down to typically one issue in the end. Mm-hmm. If that's the question, we can get the American people to ask themselves, we'll have another Trump term.
That's a great way. That's a great closing note, because that really is the big question is, what exactly will that question be in the fall? How will the election get framed?
I think we know, again, typically it's one or two narratives, and we probably already have them. One is response to the virus, and second is who's best for your recovery.
There you go.
Agreed.
Well, thank you both for what has been a really delightful, engaging conversation. You both are real masters of politics and also policy, and really understand how that all ties in together. We thank you very much, and look forward to having you sometime in the future as well.
Great
Great.
pleasure.
Thank you,
Thank
guys,
you.
governors.
Thank
Dwight, Mark, thank you for bringing us back together again.
Great.
That's really great.
Great to see you, my
You know,
friend.
hey, Governor, we need to get you over to Maryland to give some speeches also with Governor Bob.
You already have enough speechifiers in Maryland.
No, we need you to speak at dinners. We do a lot of dinners and stuff like
Crab
that.
cake.
No, I've been to your dinner. Very
Crab cakes,
impressive.
Governor.
What's that, Governor?
Well, more crab cakes for you.
Right.
Get you over here.
Okay.
And he's
Yes, I
practically in Maryland now. He's like right on the eastern shore of like what
Yeah, yeah,
Ocean City's what, a stone's throw from you now?
yeah, 2 counties up.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dwight. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye now.
guys. Take care.